Signore e signori, benvenuti.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 40th Masi Prize, a very important celebration, and it's fair enough to celebrate it in the venue where it was first started. We are at Sant'Ambrogio di Valpolicella, in the Romanesque church here. And I'd like to introduce the Deputy President of the Foundation and Chairman of Masi Agricola, Sandro Boscaini. Here we are. Good morning and thank you very much. So, 40 years, this is an important anniversary. You were the promoter. Tell us more about it. Yes, 40 years. We go back in 1981. These were tough years for Italian enology. We were just beginning our renaissance, but still with memories of a rather turbulent past. And indeed, after a few years, you see that there was the scandal of methanol. And personally, we were dissatisfied with my family in terms of the way the wine from the Venetian region was being valued. And talking to friends and people of culture, we pointed out this discomfort, and they told me, but why don't you put your wine, Amarone, on the pedestal and associate it with people from different walks of life, entrepreneurs, intellectuals, etc. And the statement is, this is our wealth, and this is our wealth with the features of the Venetians, of the people living in the Venetian regions, the ability of looking ahead, the ability of working hard. And this is the way the Premio Masi originated. Let's take a walk and tell us why we are back to this very important and historical venue. Well, I'll tell you why we left it a few years back, because after so many years, we had too many friends and they couldn't be hosted here, and we had to find a bigger venue. But we thought it was only fair to go back, and because of the pandemic and because of the restrictions in terms of the number of people, we said, let's go back to our origins, to our cradle of spirituality and of culture here in the Valpolicella, one of the most beautiful venues in the Veneto region. What about grape harvesting this year? Oh yes, harvesting went very, very well. A fantastic quality of grape, not very much though, but I've never seen in many years such wonderfully incredible quality. Although in June and May we had many days of rain, but then it was a crescendo with the heat, and particularly over the last months or 1.5 months, the temperature went up. So our grapes are into the fruttae, following the ancient tradition of having an over maturation of the grapes, and they will stay until halfway through in January or early in February, according to the season. And during this period, something will get lost in terms of weight and water evaporating, and then the grapes will get a further aroma, and we will have a great Amarone when we will celebrate our 50th birthday. So, if grapes are setting, we cannot, and we have to get into the church right now. And for me, it's really moving to indeed perform there.
Eccoci qua, eccoci qua.
Here we are. Welcome, and thank you very much for having joined us here in this mystical and magic venue. And I have to say also, the setting is perfect, and we are in a sacred place. This is a Pieve Romanica, one of the most ancient and most precious, because it was first built between the 7th and 8th century during the Longobard era. I'd like to salute all of you and we will introduce you to the people who have earned this prize. So welcome to the authorities and all our guests as well. We would have wished to have many more of them, but unfortunately this was not possible. But many are following us through a streaming on Masi Wine, and so please ask questions. Put them on the chat line and on the website fondazionimasi.com, and also all those who are following us through Telearena. We have also the mayor from Verona, Mr. Federico Sboarina, whom we thank very much, and I'd like to call upon him for addressing us.
Buonasera.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I am really moved because I start from something that I said a week ago when we opened Vin Italy. I was saying at that time that 1 week earlier I was moved to see so many companies connected with enology be awarded prizes, because those who are knowledgeable in terms of wine know very well that the question is not just harvesting, bottling, but its culture, its passion, its identity. So that's why I dare say that Mr. Sandro Boscaini, for me, is the epitome of all this. Why? Because Premio Masi, the Masi Award, could only be originated by him, although he is very shy, but I regard him as being one of the historical founders of Venitaly. So the connection between the culture here in the Veneto region, our culture, the traditions, etc., the world of wine, if I were not aware of what the Masi Foundation was, I would think that this is the only place where all this could have been originated. This is 40 years of history and culture. This morning we were at the opening of a great museum, Casa Maffei, at Palazzo Maffei, by Gigi Carlo, an incredible patron who has donated to our community, to our city, something which is unique, and nobody else has it in Italy. Why do I mention this? Because I connect both events, this and the Masi Prize, and that's why I am very proud, because I see that in our community we care for culture. It's not just a question of being entrepreneur or working, etc., but generating wealth also means this, and therefore returning what one has earned in terms of culture, of identity, of tradition, of history, of values. And for me, this is not only wonderful, but it's fundamental for the growth of the community. So thank you very much for these 40 years of history and life. Thank you. Thank you very much. So Mr. Federico Sboarina, the mayor of Verona. So We're celebrating 40 years, and we have to say that this is a rather second difficult year from the inception of the pandemic. But thanks to everyone's efforts and thanks to scientific research, which we are going to mention as well today, we start seeing a few signs of recovery. And every year, the Premio Masi has a title as a subject, and we have chosen two fundamental words, vision and courage. This is the message that we want to launch on this 40th year of the Premio Masi. Vision and courage. And over and beyond words, I have a video to show you.
Possiamo fare anche un applauso.
A round of applause to all of them.
Isabella Bossi Fedrigotti.
Mrs. Isabella Bossi Fedrigotti, just a statement on the reason why vision and courage. But after 1.5 years of pandemic, we had to invent something new. I'm not saying inventing the future, which is just too wide a concept, but find new avenues as well. So vision and courage sounded to us the words that we needed to recover and to continue with our prize. Among other things, I have to say that these are ideas that continued to be very alive over the course of these past few years. Premio Masi, the Masi Prize, has always tried to look for vision and courage, but I'd like to comment on the very word and idea of vision. Vision means dreaming, and women dream more than men. Courage is a male asset, but women are never fearful, though. We have two ladies among the people who have earned this prize, and I'm curious to hear what they'll say about their dreams. Thank you. At this point, there is a curiosity, so I'd like you to meet all our awardees.
Civiltà Veneca is the first prize that we are going to give. This is the acknowledgement of the nation personalities by birth, family, or adoption who stood out in the literature, fine arts, journalism, science, show business, economy, and who, with their work, promoted and valued the skills of the nation people in all fields of human activity, becoming the heralds of the fundamental values of this land. So the first to receive this prize, who has already been chairman of the Italian Space Agency, and for the contribution to the resolution of the pandemic, and also for writing the book entitled La matematica del virus, i numeri per capire e sconfiggere la pandemia. The prize is given to Mr. Roberto Battiston, experimental physicist. Here we are, Professor. Welcome. Could you please explain why figures are so important in a pandemic? You produce figures in the laboratory. Well, like Galileo said, numbers are important every time we talk about science, and the development of a pandemic is a piece of science. So we need the contribution of biologists, of physicians to understand what is happening, but also in order to understand even better and learn from the past, to foresee what is going to happen. Figures are very important because it makes you understand how the mechanism works. Mr. Battiston always says that figures have a margin of error. This is what the science says. Science says that it is not about just a thesis, but it is also the doubt, the uncertainty, because when you consider the uncertainty, you understand something new, because you always have to pay attention to details, because from there very important inventions and very important discoveries come. Thank you very much, Mr. Battiston, and please take your seat, and I would like to introduce the second prize winner for her research in the environmental and other activities. As for the environmentalist involved in the protection of Venice, its territory, her research in climate change and strengthening of ties between science and sustainable policy. Mrs. Jane Da Mosto, welcome and congratulations. Before I ask questions to her, I would like to show one of her pictures. Well, here she is. Jane Da Mosto is that lady there. She's like Athena, the goddess of wisdom and the emblem of courage. What does that picture represent? Well, a picture shows just a part of the scene on Earth. We were very many on the 5th of June of this year to protest against the abuse against Venice. I would like also to comment that besides this courage of the many who participated in this protest, we are going to need objective studies, real data, and a coordinated work involving the whole community, not only political personalities or economic experts in economics, in order to solve the problems not only of Venice but also of the world. Thank you very much, Jane Da Mosto. Please take your seat. We are going to go into more depth. Now, it is the time to introduce the third prize winner. For its activity as a musician and entrepreneur, founder of the very first Italian company manufacturing concert grand pianos of great artisan and technological value, featuring on some of the world's most prestigious musical scenes, Civiltà Veneta Masi Award is given to Mr. Paolo Fazioli. Welcome, Mr. Fazioli. Well, it is also the 40th anniversary of Fazioli Company, so like the Masi Company. Well, I know that a few days ago, Mr. Fazioli also was given another award, the Frederick Chopin Award, because the pianists who won chose the grand pianos Fazioli. So during the lockdown, we have rediscovered ourselves. The figures say that the record companies have shown that we have rediscovered music. And this is an important signal for the future. And during the lockdown, people rediscovered the value of staying at home, and also music played inside our homes. So the requests for pianos grew, and this is due to the fact that people felt like making music more and had more people at hand to play music. Thank you very much. Take your seat. Now I'm giving you my shoulders, but I have to introduce the next prize, International Masi Award for One Civilization. It pertains to the wine growing and viticulture and rewards the most significant personalities who contributed to praise and value the ancient culture of wines and wine international level. Now, for the international, she's an international biologist and professor of pharmacology. Her scientific works have earned her the title of lifelong senator of the Republic of Italy. The Masi International Grosso d'Oro Veneziano Prize is given to Mrs. Elena Cattaneo.
Senatrice, benvenuta.
Welcome.
Visione e coraggio, no?
Vision and courage. These are the two words that were chosen. Well, they are very brave words, don't you think? What do you think about them? Well, vision evokes the idea and the hope that we can go into the direction of a society who's not afraid of knowing and getting to know through the use and the compass of the scientific method. So a society that enthuses with science and its strategy and its positions for tomorrow. Courage is an important term, an important word. It cannot be an empty word. And of course, if you are courageous, you show it with your behavior. Each and every one of us can weigh their behavior. I reached the idea that you can measure your courage through your behavior, and behaviors can be many. Behavior means not only doing things when they need to be done or made, but courage is sometimes saying no. You have to be able to say no. And even more, scientists, if they want to defend and safeguard society and citizens, have to develop their courage and take it to the public sphere. Very interesting. We are going to get into some more depth in a few minutes. Now it is time for the last prize winner, International Masi Award for Wine Civilization for the wine growing and viticulture, rewarding the most significant personalities who contributed to praise and value the ancient culture of vines and wine at international level. He is a university lecturer, a popularizer. His genetic studies on native and international varieties are a reference point. He's been involved for decades in the research into vines able to withstand climate change and pathogen agents. Mr. Attilio Scienza.
Prego, professore.
Welcome, Professor. Now, your task now is to explain the meaning of this word, which is cisgenesis or cisgenetics. Well, we have to go back to the meaning of the word. Cis and trans are two suffixes that are used in the chemistry, they in geographic terms, trans-Caucasic, for example, or even in the society, trans for men. Well, cis means within, and trans means without. So how do they apply to life? Cis is something, a transformation that happens within, coupling individuals that are sexually compatible. Trans is something that happens outside, that happens through the incoming of something from outside. So transgenesis, for example, an example, Pinot Grigio, comes from a spontaneous mutation within the Pinot Nero. Now, with cisgenetics, we operate like nature without any leaps. So it is quite an important concept. Thank you very much, Professor Scienza. Please take your seat. And now we are here to talk with our prize winners.
I will begin with Senator Cattaneo. You devoted your entire life to science and scientific research. Some of us may say right now, maybe exaggerating a little, that there are some people who are against science, anti-scientific approaches. Maybe we too who work in communication highlight too much anti-scientific positions. But what do you think about it all? What is the feeling that you have vis-a-vis all this? I'm never discouraged, of course, because we live in a society, and in our wonderful country, we have instruments to react, courage, culture, professionalism. We have everything. But if you want to react, well, certainly, you know, in our country, we know not very much about science, and we know very little about scientific methods. Most of the times we think that science is something that has to give you a result immediately. We saw it right now with this pandemic. People expect to have an immediate solution. So there is really an issue here in terms of knowledge and in terms of telling people about the goals and the way research functions, especially in a peaceful time. And I have to say that sometimes this skepticism is just sterile and irrational. You have to study, you have to deep dive into it. One has to understand where this skepticism comes from a minority maybe, but we have to study this issue. And I have to say that most of the times skepticism is fed by communication because we are wrong in communicating a certain moment, a certain position, trying to exacerbate differences when indeed we're just all working to get closer and closer to knowledge. There is a long way, so to say, before, getting to achieving this goal. But you have to be courageous. You have to be courageous in terms of manifesting your assets, your skills, maybe based upon the great scientific and humanistic tradition of this country, and look back and understand how many people devoted themselves to working professionally. We should never give in to ignorance. Well, that's why I'm saying that there is also a liability and a responsibility by the means of communication and the media. Professor Battiston, you have noted a couple of years ago that there was something that wasn't working within this pandemic. You started to test the numbers because they sounded too volatile to you. So how come you decided to put yourself available to study this pandemic? One is because we as physicists or scientists in general is to produce numbers through experiments and then take the most out of it. If we don't deal with numbers as it should and giving them importance and being accurate, etc., then we cannot explain ourselves the way things work. And second, as a citizen, the way we communicated and we informed on the pandemic through numbers, for me was very confusing. And talking to colleagues and friends, I discovered that they were confused as well. And little by little, I discovered that there are rules which I did not invent, but were developed by epidemiologists. Fauci in America, Merkel in Germany understand very well. You have statistics, you have priorities, and I started to learn all this. After all, it's not that complex. Together with friends and colleagues, Mr. Giorgio Parisi, the Nobel Prize winner, who honored Italy with this fantastic prize, was also committed into that. Physicists have a great respect for numbers, and in this particular case, it was a nice discovery to start testing that if you really deal with numbers the way you should, for instance, the numbers given to us by public authorities, you know more about what is happening, what is about to be happening, and whether your country is on the good or bad side, and therefore you can use your common sense to say things, because most of the times we are being informed through snapshots, so to say. But if we understand what is happening through numbers, we know whether this person can fall or can go on. Very often we get surprised, but this is science. A scientist does this because a scientist wishes to anticipate what is going to be happening. We're not interested in numbers as such, but just to understand what is about to happen. You have mentioned Mr. Anthony Fauci in America and Mrs. Merkel in Germany. Was it a criticism? I have to say that with Mr. Draghi in Italy, calculating with numbers has gone back to be a serious business. Before it was probably a little lighter. we have also a scholar from abroad, although she's Venetian. She comes from South Africa, studied in London, but she is Venetian in particular, and she is Italian. Your battles, which recently made Greta Thunberg famous, and also Queen Elizabeth said that this political decision makers decide nothing. People talk about all these issues, but then no decisions are taken. You said it also earlier on, but please expand on what we need to be able to have environment and sustainability at the center of our political agenda. In my opinion, we need to open up and be transparent. And when we often talk about participation, about sharing, as I said before, we have to put together all stakeholders, not only from an economic or political standpoint. And this works only if there is a good basis of understanding and knowledge, thanks to what all the other winners of the Masi Prize are trying to do. They're trying to make things understandable. And I'm profoundly convinced that if we are not acting now, it would be too late. It's not just me saying it, but we have knowledge. The famous blah, blah, blah mentioned by Greta means that, you know, people now are aware of what needs to be done. And then, well, maybe everyone has to indeed own their own vision and courage and think that together we can change things. It is truly of utmost importance to get coordinated, and what I often see in Venice is that people tend to keep separate the various interest holders within the local community, and we have to work all together and sit around the same table all together so that we may define the limits of what is possible. That's very interesting as a phrase. Professor Scienza, I would now turn to you. Before you talked about cisgenetics, you know that some people, ignorant as I am, when they hear the very word genetics, and Professor Cattaneo may lecture on this, as soon as they hear the word genetics, they start shivering, they don't know what it is all about. Why is it that we don't have to fear these new technologies? Well, you see, there is an assumption that we have to make and start from, which is connected to our background. In our rather recent history, we went through a period where schooling reforms developed based on Mr. Croce and Mr. Gentile's ideals, got rid from the curricula of all scientific topics. In the 20s and in the 30s, they thought that you would be able to create an elite in Italy without having any scientific background. There is a word, STEM, which is an acronym and has a rather peculiar meaning. STEM means, you know, a flower means a stem indeed. So you have mathematics, genetics, physics that were fundamental for our own contemporary developments. Without them, it would have been impossible to develop a vaccine. Well, why is it that people fear the word genetics? Because no one has ever taught them what genetics means. Genetics go back goes back to 200, 300 years ago. Mendel eventually gave value and content to the very word genetics. This Bohemian monk carried out a number of experiments, and he understood that putting together peas with other plants, etc., he could cross different species. From before them, genetics did not exist because everything went spontaneously. A farmer would see something interesting, but he never thought he could actually cross a species. Genetics is first originated halfway through the 1800s, but you have no genetics into our curriculum. We study DNA, RNA, but that's not genetics. Genetics is far more complex and has a formidable anthropological basis. It's the prerequisite for our life in all spheres of our life. Until you make this effort to make people aware of what it is, people will fear genetics. Yes, there's a basic ignorance. Also, the media are not helping. Well, certainly, yes, you can just chase journalists. There's no problem at all. I now would give the floor to Mr. Fazioli. Is music science? Is the art of muses that comes from Latin? So it's the proportion of sounds, and also music has to do with the word science. But tell us, how would you convince us that music brings us back to be in harmony with ourselves?
Well, then, that music has to do with mathematics and with science and physics is absolutely known, and everybody knows that. If we think about musical writing, I don't know how many of you are able to read a score. It is a diagram, really, if you will. There is intensity and time of sound and duration of time. So the notes give you the height, which is to say the frequency of sound over time. It is a Cartesian diagram, really, a graph. There is nothing which is more scientific than that, but we are talking about the language through which music is sent and produced and conveyed. But we also need to understand the fractions, because when you need a score, there is the timing, you know, for fourth, 3/4, and so on. This means that we can play, let's say, 4 notes together, or 6 or 10 notes together, and so the rhythm changes. So rhythm is also measured through this. So when we talk about sound, and I'm talking about the very sound of music, in the company we always measure. We measure with an instrument which is called sonogram, which makes the history of sound. It evaluates the intensity, the power, the frequency range, the duration. So it is a snapshot of a sound, a picture of a sound. All of this is science, acoustic science, acoustics in a word. So if we think about our own work, which is building musical instrument, that is to say pianos, well, it is the ideal union between art and science, because building a piano is really something very complicated. You have to know a lot of things: physics, rational mechanics, building science, metallurgy, woodwork, Well, there is an endless list, really, that I could mention, and all of this in order to achieve a result which cannot be measured, because after all this work, we just have a sound. Did we do well? Did we not do well? Were we right or not? We don't know. So all in all, music is mathematics. And so when there are people who say, well, I do not understand mathematics, but I like music a lot, because music, of course, is art, while mathematics is something cold. This is nonsense, really, because these two things are very close to each other. Well, now I would like to cross-fertilize your fields, because Mrs. Cattaneo criticized very strongly and very harshly biodynamic agriculture and created a debate. We also dealt with it on Radio 24. Why did you feel the need for this kind of criticism? Because something very serious is happening, and it was happening then, especially now after the pandemic, with a vaccine in this country that I would define as schizophrenic. We are going to pass a bill which is going to go through the lower chamber that makes biodynamic agriculture the same as, with the same value as organic agriculture. If you go and see what biodynamic agriculture, you understand that you go back 100 years. We are going back to Rudolf Steiner, to esotericism, so the preparations and the use of organic, fertilizers. Now, with the fertilization, of organic fertilization, that is supposed to capture cosmic rays and conveying the astral forces. And while I was working in the Senate, I was thinking that this bill cannot find really the approval of this country, because it means that approving this bill, making it a law, means reintroducing magic thoughts. And it means that public money is going to be made available for these kinds of pseudoscience, of this pseudo-research. It is not only that the biodynamic agriculture is going to participate in public discussions, but it means that magic is going to go into a law. It is a non-return point, and it is going to be the end of this country, because we are not going to have space for science, because 2 + 2 is going to make 5. Any common basis is going to be lost, any common basis for discussion. So I found myself, and you see the passion and the anger that I have inside me when I talk about this, when I am forced to talk in the highest Republican institution. When I talk to my colleagues, I have to talk about manure with my colleague senators, which is a trap, really. I am very afraid that this trap this mistake will end up with the approval from the lower chamber. And so if this happens, we are going to be the first country in the world in the prize of when one Italian won a Nobel Prize, having magic thought and exoterism, which is to say biodynamic agriculture, in an act, in a law issued by the state. So I don't want to go into this direction, and as long as I breathe, I will fight this kind of things. And there is nothing against the cosmic rays, of course. Mr. Battiston, you mentioned another word, organic, because also Mr. Scienza, when he hears about organic, well, this is something that sort of provokes you. Well, I agree with Mrs. Cattaneo all the way. Well, I have an idea that organic means aporia. It is a Greek word which is a non-return. It is a pathway where you cannot come back from. There is no solution to it. It is easy to show it. You don't have to be a great scientist to be able to say that organic agriculture is really trivial. You cannot give up 300 years of cultivation, of science, to go back to organic farming, because it denies everything and it doesn't suggest anything. It doesn't mean sustainability. This is the misunderstanding. Organic farming doesn't mean sustainability. When the European community gave the formula for the next 30 years, it said that organic farming should cover 25% of our agriculture production. And why not 100%? Because otherwise all the grains, all the milk and everything else will have to be bought somewhere else. Well, this is a word that was very and is very successful because they appeal to feelings, they evoke the past, our agricultural tradition. But before I ask the same question to the other prize winners, I would like to know what Mr. Boscaini thinks. Well, I experience it every day. The word organic farming is a magic word. All around the world, I do understand what has been said from these authoritative people, but we need to disseminate culture. We have to make people understand how important science is, which produced wealth, the healthy food of today, and it gives something to eat to everyone. So we need to have positive proposals. Perhaps we have to give up something, but this doesn't mean we have to go back 100 years. I would like to ask Mr. Battiston, well, you have an asteroid around Jupiter that has been devoted to you. It is between Jupiter and Mars. And he told me once that he was going to retire there on his asteroids. Now, in 30 or 40 years, what do we have to expect from scientific research in the cosmos?
Before answering you, I have to reconnect to what we have just heard about what has been said about science. First of all, what you said about an anti-scientific position may become a law that I feel I have nothing to add. But let us remind ourselves that science only goes back to 400 years. We have millennia of past history where science wasn't as yet there. We are a very brittle species. What we have gained over the past 400 years by great people, and we have to protect it, cannot be bread and butter for everyone. This is a daily achievement for us scientists and for the rest of society, because if we live the way we live here today, with well-being, with a very top lifespan, but we don't realize that. We have the chance and we take the opportunity, and sometimes we have the luxury of destroying what we are living upon. And it is not to be taken for granted that in a world where science dominates, society may appreciate it, and we all have to work together, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a scientist or an activist, because we have to make a small step forward every single day. Because let us remind ourselves that COVID, with whatever has happened, is like an intermediate test to get a degree. Our final goal is getting the degree that is the state of the world environmental-wise. And we did not pass this intermediate test through COVID, and we are not ready to face the ecologic and environmental issues. My visit to the Masi cellar, what I've heard about how you build up a piano, etc., all this wealth of knowledge and skills, well, if we cannot take this common sense skills and knowledge and inform billions of people, we will not be able to solve the environmental problems, because we're all involved, and this has to push us to think more, much more in depth than just thinking about biodynamic agriculture or whatever. And what about the universe? Well, how do we address the problem of universe? First of all, we are a very brittle species, and we live, 80 or 100 years. If we're not that lucky, we live even less. And in these last few centuries, we were able to describe whatever surrounds us up to the Big Bang. This is incredible. We are a tiny little place in a galaxy, etc. We're made of dust, etc. But thanks to some giants and the efforts made by thousands of people, we can think and talk about the origins of everything. Maybe tomorrow we'll change our mind, but this is extraordinary for the time being. Every single time when you wake up, let us think how great it is, our environment, within its enormous brittleness. And this has to give us hope. And having said so, some people look at the future into the space, like Elon Musk, as a way of leaving this planet. Yes, maybe some of us will colonize Mars and leave our Earth, but we are never going to have a B planet. This is our planet. This is our space. And space is good because from the outer space, we can look at our planet. The COP21 protocols in Paris were approved by everyone because satellites allowed to measure precisely what was happening. And this was an alarming situation which was voiced by scientists since many years. These are clearly defined data. Now it's up to politics, it's up to society to take a decision. So we're all involved not only to to make science progress from space, but to change our mindset. So let's go back to Venice. You told us while we were having lunch, you have passion, you're strong. Can you tell us in just a few words why these large cruisers are not bringing a benefit to the city, to the lagoon, and to the territory, and why your battle? First of all, one has to single out the fact that there is a full interdependence between protecting the lagoon, safeguarding the city, and the well-being of those who live there, of the locals. Large cruisers in the lagoon are like an invasion, are bringing about atmospheric pollution, which we can no longer afford. We can no longer afford to have these large cruisers. They use fossil energy, which goes far beyond the alarming situation we're already into. In the specific case of Venice, many studies revealed that there is scarce, if non-existent economic advantages, and we cannot just think that everything can be expressed in economic terms. I know that many people think that, and often we ourselves work to give economic value to things that are just outside the market, because we have to integrate into our considerations and choices things that are priceless, like air, etc. I'd like to close this conversation with a line by Maestro Muti. He uttered it a few days back. Maestro Muti said, "No one may conduct an orchestra without having put his hands on the piano." We were talking about it, and you kind of disagreed on this. How come you're in disagreement with Maestro Muti? But you gave me a very interesting explanation. Of course, Maestro Muti is not wrong, but I personally, I can't subscribe what is just being said so in such a tranchant way. He said it's not possible. Okay, if you're a conductor, of course you have to know music very well, and you have to be familiar with the most complete instrument to make music, which is the piano. It is a complex instrument, and play piano is difficult. Under some respects, it's easier than other instruments. For instance, if you take trumpets, if you take strings, etc. Those who play those instruments must only concentrate in creating a sound, whilst you play piano is, under some respects, easier. But then you have to play many parts all together. Let's say the piano is a kind of multitasking instrument. Maybe Maestro Muti meant this. Well, you have to take into consideration many different levels in order to have an exhaustive vision and have a background so that you are in a position of managing the entire orchestra. What you need is a musical experience which should be as deep as possible. But it's not a rule. Not all conductors were good pianists. Some of the conductors maybe used to play violins or cellos, etc. Let's say, that a full-fledged statement like this, it's not really the best that you can do. We got many questions. There is a question to you, Senator Cattaneo. In your opinion, politicians are doing enough to support research in science? Well, I've always seen people acting intermittently. There's never been a long-term plan. Research and study need long-term investments. Usually politicians are just looking for short-term consensus. We have now the European Recovery Plan. Maybe this is the right time for us to contribute to be the new sentinels for our society. I have another question to Professor Battiston. Every single country in the world adopted a different policy to tackle this pandemic. In terms of numbers, is there a country that had better results than others? That's easy, apart from the state of Vatican or very small countries with very few citizens. Incredible to say, but Italy is one of the best in the world, certainly the best in Europe. We had 130,000 people who died, 2 devastating waves, so we paid a heavy price, but we now have very low numbers. Why? For a specific reason: systematic vaccination planning, but we are not the only one having 70 to 80% of our people being vaccinated. There are other countries. There is also a pinch of luck because the Delta variant came in at the end of June, so later than England, France and Germany, and as it always happens with exponential numbers, if you start small, you grow slowly, and the opposite is true. But there is a further fact. One has to acknowledge that after many mistakes, we were able right now to keep up with our route. So a lot of vaccines, but also keeping masks, social distancing. On average, people are very careful. And also our Green Pass is helping us because it divides the vulnerables from those who have been vaccinated. So this coherence, this policy that gained momentum over the past few months are leading us now in October 2021 in a situation which is different than last year when we were all crying because of the second waves. This year we're talking about whether we have a plus 1% or 3%, or maybe our Green Pass is actually singling out what remains of this pandemic. So let us stick to numbers. Think about the United Kingdom, where they have biologists, scientists. The politicians were wrong because they anticipated some processes and they put ideology before science. When this happens, this is the exact recipe for getting a disaster. Let's learn from others, and once upon a time, let's acknowledge that something good was being done. The very last question is to Mrs. Jane da Mosto. Over and beyond caring for Venice, in your opinion, what is the environmental battle that should be fought by all of us in the immediate future? Well, with due respect to those who asked me this question, the environmental battle is not something apart from the rest of mankind. We have to learn to live with our biosphere. So it's a battle per se, not just an environmental battle, because we have to tackle the climate crisis, not only time-wise. So we have this very important negotiations of COP26 in Glasgow, but also because we're going through some climate change since quite some time. And I believe that in facing the climate crisis, I'd like to also single out how complex it is and how much we need to be open to implement many different strategies. You can no longer expect a single solution. I have spoken the other day with a politician, and he said to me, but you make things too complex. But that's a complex issue. We are humans, and we can get over it, get by. Well, I thank you all, and we're now awarding the prizes, moving behind you, and you will be awarded the famous bottle, but that's not all. You will be awarded the content of a barrel, and you have signed your barrel a few minutes earlier at the Cantina Masi. This is a recording of this afternoon. Every single winner signs the barrel, which, as Mr. Bottaini was saying, is the signature on the content of the barrel itself.
So this is the award-giving ceremony. One by one, the prize winners will come to the center of the stage. Mr. Battiston, and the award is given by Marco Vicevani. We invite him to the stage. We can also give them a round of applause. Thank you. I remind you, by the way, that this bottle has a gold incision of the glass maestros of Murano. It is an engraving in gold. Now, Mrs. Jane da Mosto, and the chairman of Masi Foundation, gives her the prize. Here comes the bottle, the picture. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jane da Mosto, Mrs. Jane da Mosto. A Masi Award for the Venetian civilization, Mr. Paolo Fazioli. Mr. Sandro Boscaini, the chairman of the foundation, gives him the prize. Here comes the bottle.
Eccoci qua. Un'altra foto.
Another picture is being taken. Thank you very much, Mr. Fazioli, and congratulations again. International award, the Veneziano Grosso d'Oro, the senator, Mrs. Cattaneo, is receiving the award from the prefect. This award is a reproduction in gold of the Grosso Veneziano, which was the money, the currency used in Venice for a long time. And finally, the International Masi Prize for Wine Civilization to Mr. Scienza, and this is given by Mr. Federico Castellucci.
Ecco qua.
Well, very simply, I want to say something. It is a great pleasure, but I find that this prize was given to a person with an extraordinary culture of the genetics of wine and also the technological development of this product. This is perfect, really. Thank you very much.
Allora, Isabella Bossi Fedrigotti è contenta.
Mrs. Bossi Fedrigotti, are you happy? Well, are you satisfied with your question? You were curious, you told me. Well, we are very happy. We couldn't have hoped for anything better. Well, I want to thank you. Please take your seat again. And I would like to invite the vice chairman of the Masi Foundation. Please come to the stage. Well, look at the prize winners. They are extraordinary. Of course, science is not to my credit or my company, but this is to the credit of this team of friends who share ideas and the way of living, which is simple, countryside way of living, but with very deep concepts. Well, the 40th anniversary ends here, but next year it is going to be 41 years. But also 250 years of the Boscaini family with Masi, when the Boscaini family came into touch with this magic place, the small valley of Masi in the medium hills of Valpolicella. It is a place where we produce an extraordinary wine, and 6 generations before me, they produced this kind of products of wine, and through the years we received this tradition. We thank all the prize winners, and next year we are going to wish a long life to Masi Company. And now we have to think about the 250th anniversary.